This morning at Ecclesiastes chapter 7, and I'm picking up what the teacher has to say to us there. Ecclesiastes chapter 7. A good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume, and the day you die is better than the day you were born. Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us. A wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time. Better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. A fool's laughter is quickly gone, like thorns crackling in a fire. This also is meaningless. Extortion turns wise people into fools, and bribes corrupt the heart. Finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. Control your temper, for your anger labels you a fool. Don't long for the good old days. That is not wise. Wisdom is even better when you have money. Both are a benefit as you go through life. Wisdom and money can get you almost anything, but only wisdom can save your life. Accept the way God does things, for who can straighten what he has made crooked? Enjoy prosperity while you can, but when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. Remember that nothing is certain in this life. May the Lord open his word to our hearts. I don't know, that comes off a little negative, doesn't it? You surprised I was on vacation last week even? So our passage begins, a good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume. That's what it says. That's the opening line. A good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume. Not obsessing about every moment. It doesn't mean that we obsess about what people think of us and we walk around and, I need a good reputation, so I have to be careful. And anybody who gets upset with me, anybody who doesn't like what I say or how I say it, then I need to really be in turmoil all the time. What do they think? What do the neighbors think of me? What do the people next door think? What is that guy at work that's always grumpy? Is it my fault? Is he mad at me? What's happening? It's not what the teacher is telling us there. It's not about obsessing about what people think, but it's the reputation that we build over the long haul. It's what we're known for. It's what we're consistent in. It's the thing that really defines us. And so he says a good reputation, in that sense, is more valuable than costly perfume. Perfume was something that was very costly and definitely an extravagance in the time of this scripture. It's about how we approach life and the results of that approach that's proven as either wisdom or as foolishness. Remember last time we met last week? Seems like a lot longer ago. Once you biked 175 plus kilometers, it feels like a really long week. So the teacher, Koheleth, the guy who wrote Ecclesiastes, maybe it's Solomon, that would make sense, but whoever he is, he's wise. He's got wisdom about life. He's earned some lessons through the way that his life has played out. And so he teaches us about what it means to really engage with life and live well. And here it's a little surprise. He starts off, a good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume. And then he continues, and the day you die is better than the day you were born. Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart. It doesn't sound happy. It doesn't sound like he's being positive. It doesn't sound like he's approaching things and trying to look at the bright side. And we are a people who like that kind of message and maybe sit a little uncomfortably with this. What is this doing in the scripture? Why is this guy seen as wise when he looks at life through this negative lens? He says, the day you die is better than the day you were born. Sounds like he would be a lot of fun to hang around with, doesn't it? The day you die is better than the day you're born. Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart. And at first blush, that may seem like he's being negative, that he's Mr. Downer, that he's saying, look, negative stuff's always better than positive stuff. The guy that's always looking at the glass as half empty, the Eeyore of life, the guy who's just always seeing what could go wrong and naysaying everything. But that's not exactly what's happening here. He says that the day you die is better than the day you're born. Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies. I think it was George Bernard Shaw that said, death is the great inevitability. It's the great statistic. 1 out of 1 die. Like nobody gets out of life alive, right? Other than Elijah. He went straight to heaven, skipped, did not pass go, did not wait for his $200. He was taken straight to be with God. But other than that, everybody dies. Like we're all facing it. The people who came before us died. We know that we'll die, and that's how life ends. And so the teacher says, that's the great equalizer. That's the thing that's going to happen. That's what we're headed towards. But he says, the day you die is better than the day you're born. Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. And that one may stick with us. But if you stop and think about it, if you had 2 friends, and one of them was celebrating an anniversary, a birthday, some special occasion, and they said, hey, come over, we're going to have this great get-together, there's going to be cake, we're going to play music, we're going to spend time together, we're going to celebrate my wife's birthday, or we're going to celebrate our anniversary. Join us in the party. And then another friend, you find out that they had a loved one die, and they're grieving and they're hurting. And the funeral's on the same day as the party. Which one do you go to? You go to the funeral, right? Why? Because your friend's hurting. Because you could go to the party, and yes, everybody's going to have a good time, and you could maybe have more fun there. I mean, if you didn't have a conscience. Parties are more fun than funerals, right? But I doubt that any of us would choose to go to the party if we knew our friend was hurting and they were going to be at that funeral and they were going to be down. We'd go, I'm sorry, regrets about the party. I know I said I'd come, but I got to be with my friend. Their mom, their sister, their child died. My place is here because I can do more good here than I could at the party. They'll still have a good time at the party without me, but I need to support my friend who's hurting. And so the teacher says, look, when you're young and a little more foolhardy, you may prefer parties. You may prefer the good things in life. You may avoid pain and look for any way to get out of pain and to have a good time, to enjoy yourself. And you may avoid the hard things in life for the easy and the fun, but it is not wise to do that. And a life that's lived that way, that always seeks the party and always avoids the funeral, is no way to live. And so he says, better to spend your time at funerals than at parties, because everyone dies. Everyone dies, so everyone goes through that grief. And when somebody's grieving, our place is to be beside them and to help them. and to support them and to comfort them. And sometimes there's no words you can say that can bring comfort. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just quietly hug them and cry with them. And so the teacher says, sometimes that's better. So the living should take heart. It's not about going where it'll be the most fun, but it's sometimes we can do more good. And we seek for where we can do good rather than where we can feel good. There's a classic argument for atheism that says, if God is all good, then he would want to do away with pain and suffering in the world, that he would want everything to be easy and pleasurable, and no one would ever suffer and no one would ever die. If God is all good, he would want to remove evil and suffering from the world. And if he was all powerful, he'd be able to do that. Like if he's all good, definitely he wouldn't want to leave people to suffer or for evil to exist in the world. But if he's all powerful, he could do that. He could just make it so that nothing bad ever happens. So since there's evil and suffering in the world, the existence of an all good and an all powerful God, completely impossible. That's the argument. And it kind of makes sense in a way. There's a certain logic to it that really tears at us. And so the challenge that it provides to us as believers is pretty daunting. And any of us who have suffered with someone, have watched someone suffer, and they say, why? Why would God allow this to happen? I thought he was good. Well, he is good, but I just can't explain it. But can't God do this? Isn't God all powerful? Like, is God powerless? Is he good, but he just can't manage to wipe out evil and suffering? He wants to, but he just doesn't have the goods. Or is it that he can do it, but he's like a child with a magnifying glass on an anthill, and he just likes to watch us suffer? If he's got the power to get away, turn all those things away, then why wouldn't he do that? Why wouldn't he make life better for us? It's a powerful question, and it's one that we deal with ourselves. It's one that we are challenged with by people outside the church, and people that we're not close to, people who are kind of enemies of the faith. But it's also one that people we love, people that we value, people who are fellow believers with us sometimes struggle with. And sometimes even within our own souls, we wonder, why did that happen? How did that happen in our family, among my friends? Where was God when all this was going on? And so how do we deal with this ultimate question as believers, as followers of an all-powerful and an all-good God? How do we answer that question as to what's happening there? How do we do it? It seems like the teacher is suggesting that we do it with the blues. Anybody who's ever listened to blues music, you know sometimes, any other blues fans? Couple. It's not happy music. It's not like going down the highway, cruising, top volume kind of music. But the blues can be therapeutic. The blues can help you. My wife would tell you, and that back when I was a new Christian, I discovered a guy who kind of started Christian rock music. He was like the pioneer, a guy named Larry Norman, like hair down to here and kind of a hippie guy, but he sang about Jesus. And there's one album in particular where he did an entire blues album, and it's kind of a downer of an album. And my wife would tell you that back when we were first married especially, if she came into our apartment and I was playing Larry Norman, if I was playing that album, Something New Under the Sun, she went, oh boy, what happened? Like, I loved the music, but that album, it got pulled out when I was having a bad time. It was therapeutic. The whole album kind of went through a lot of blues stuff, which wasn't typical of Christian music, but I found it really helpful if I was having a horrible time. There's one song, I Was Born to Be Unlucky. It says, the singer is saying, he says, I jumped into the river to try to do myself away. A man jumped in and saved me, went and spoiled a perfect day. I was born to be unlucky, from my shoulders to my shoes, and I guess I'm stuck with these unlucky blues. Then he goes on, he says, he dragged me to the river's edge. He said he knew I had a need. He pulled out a soggy Bible, and that man began to read. He told me things I did not know. I'm glad I did not die. He told me God's my Father, and my real home is in the sky. And I listened to that album, and there's all kinds of negative songs. There's all kinds of dealing with the hard things in life, the struggles, the broken relationships, the love gone sour, all of that. And then he comes to these kind of things where there's like this little glimpse of hope. Like I jumped into the river to do myself away, and somebody jumped in and saved me and spoiled my perfect day. Like I really didn't want to live anymore. That's pretty negative. And it's kind of funny, but it's also kind of true that sometimes things can feel so down that you're mired in it. And what I found when I listened to that album wasn't that I was wallowing in the negativity and, I came out feeling even more dire than before. I got to the end of that album and it was like, I think this guy kind of gets it. And maybe it's even worse for him than me. In fact, we started this thing, in our early marriage. We used to call it the balcony talk. Because if things were going bad like that, there was one time in a moment of sheer brilliance on my part. I love telling these kind of stories where I sound smart. But Roxanne was having a bad time. She was down. She was just being negative, and everything I tried to say positive, she shot it down. And so I grabbed her by the hand. I let her out on the balcony, and I said, "Well, why don't you just jump?" She said, "Shut up." And I said, "Well, look, if it's that bad, just go over the edge." And she said, "Fine, it's not that bad." And ever after that, one of us would get in a mood, mostly me, because I'm moodier than she is, and she would say, "Do we need to have the balcony talk?" "No, all right." But there's something about the moments that get negative that we live through, that we look back now, and I don't think we've mentioned the balcony talk in so long because we don't look at things the same way. When things start to go wrong, we start to look at other ways of looking at it. We don't just gloss it over. Like, we deal with the hard stuff. We face the difficult things. It's not that you're just smiling like a goofball no matter what happens, but there's a way that we process it so we think through it. We can see beyond what's going on that's negative, and we can say, even if things are going wrong right this minute, that we know we've been through hard things before, and we've come out the other side. And so there's something that we've learned about the way that life unpacks that makes us a little more patient. And I know everybody's looking at the fact that I just tripped. Now we can forget about my shoes. See, sometimes you have a bad day. I know. I'm grateful for that. You think you're nervous. Imagine after all my 4 hip replacements, I'd hobble up on crutches and start to fall. And people would be like, and I'm like, I'm trying to get you to concentrate on the Bible. And so I'd preach the rest of my sermon with my laces open. I'm getting smarter, kind of. So there's something about Larry Norman. There's something about the blues. There's something about facing negative circumstances and taking them in stride, not avoiding them, not pretending they're not there, not walking away from them and always pretending the glass is completely full, but looking at things with honest eyes And being able to see the negative things in life and say, yeah, that's not the only thing. C.S. Lewis says that teaches us that we learn things through those negative experiences. He says, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Did you follow that? God whispers to us in our pleasures. Like when we're having a good time, God can speak to us. He whispers to us, and we can be grateful for that. He speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. God really gets our attention when we're struggling. Sometimes we can say, hey, things are all right, and thank you, God. Thanks for all my blessings. And, we're casual about it. We might remember to say thank you to him, but we don't feel it in the depths of our souls. We say thank you, and that's nice, and we try to be grateful, and then we move on with enjoying ourselves, but it's when we really struggle that we hit our knees the hardest, and we start to pray and say, God, come on. God, help me. Be with me. And there's things you can learn in the struggle that you can't learn any other way. And so C.S. Lewis says, look, that's his megaphone. Like if you really want to learn from God, it's what happens when you're in the middle of the pain and the struggle. If your ears are open, he can teach you stuff that you couldn't learn any other way, and you definitely couldn't learn as quickly as you can when things are rough for you. And it's not that you go looking for trouble, but when it happens, he says that God can speak to us. According to the teacher, laughter isn't always the best medicine, and angst isn't always a bad thing. And it's not terrible when things get off the rails. He says sometimes we can learn from that. And so he says it's better to spend time at funerals than at parties. And there's things you can learn in your grief that you don't learn when everything's going fine. Then he continues, it's better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. Better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. Again, negative, right? Criticism is negative, but if you're getting criticized by somebody who's wise, they're saying something maybe that you need to hear. And he said it's better to have that than to be praised by a fool who doesn't know what they're talking about. A fool's laughter is quickly gone like thorns crackling in a fire. This also is meaningless. He says laughter fades, but it's the substance that matters. And then he says, he throws in this strange line in this context. He says, extortion turns wise people into fools, and bribes corrupt the heart. Extortion turns wise people into fools, and bribes corrupt the heart. He says the person is wise. They're starting off wise, but when they give in to the urge for money, when they're chasing after stuff, we talked about this a little bit last week, but when you're chasing after things and for even a moment they become important, it changes your wisdom. He doesn't say it shows that they were unwise. He says it makes them unwise. Extortion turns wise people into fools. It has a moral impact, and it changes your level of wisdom. And you stop being able to see clearly because you've gone down that path of valuing things over what's right. And so just like when it says that it's better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool, and the fool's laughter is quickly gone, it teaches us to kind of look at life and to value what's important and to know that even when things are going wrong, there are lessons to be learned, and there's ways that we can get through it and become better rather than become worse. And then he says, finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. Finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. Control your temper, for anger labels you a fool. Don't long for the good old days. This is not wise. See, it's about the long haul, so it's about finishing, and not just starting, but finishing what you started. And it's not just about getting what you want, but anger labels you a fool, he says, because sometimes we get out of control because we don't get what we want in the time we want it, and we get upset. And he says, that's not wise. That isn't good. Anger labels you a fool. Don't long for the good old days. We get angry when we don't get what we want. We long for the good old days when we don't like the days that we have. Finishing is better than starting because we are pushing through all the things that come between the beginning and the end. And so in all these couplets, what he's talking about is the fact that sometimes we can be selfish. Sometimes we can be so intent on getting what we want and having what we want and having people treat us the way we want and having everything play out for us. And whenever anything goes wrong, the world comes to an end, and we get angry and we're mad at things for not going the way that we wanted them to. And so the teacher tells us, that's not what we're about. We're not about just being selfish. It's not just about our pleasure. It's not about our contentment. It's not about what we wanted. And so just like with the funerals, he says, look, it's about thinking about other people sometimes. It's about thinking about the world we're in. It's about thinking the impact that we can have and how we can make a difference rather than just what we get and what we have and what we feel. Each of these sayings is a lesson that struggling with our mortality teaches us. That when we face discomfort, when we face the fact that we are not going to be here forever and that our bodies are starting to break down. Some of us are breaking down a lot quicker than others. Sometimes we do things and go, I'm not young like I was, right? And it happens to all of us. We're all getting older at exactly the same rate, one day at a time. Some days you feel it more. And he says, look, we should not just focus on the one thing. Don't long for the good old days. Don't long for things that you can't have and get angry. Facing discomfort as the teacher rather than the enemy is what Koheleth wants us to do. Patience is the common theme in the advice. The fool wants quick and comfortable, but he says the wise are willing to stick with things and go through the struggle and come out the other side. And so we find ourselves in the place where we need to struggle and learn and grow and be stretched. And that's a voluntary process. We can fight it. We can get mad when it happens. We can resist it and do everything to insulate ourselves from problems and struggles. But the teacher says that's not wise, that it's best to take it on. You notice that when he talks about how we approach things, he says a wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time. And I just want to point out there that he says a wise person thinks a lot about death, but a fool thinks only about having a good time. It's not saying that a wise person thinks only about death. He says a wise person thinks a lot about death. They still have good times. They still go to parties. They still enjoy life. They're still willing to engage. They're not looking at everything negatively. That's not what wisdom is. But he says a wise person is willing to think a lot about death. They're willing to take in the negative things that are happening and face them head on and think a lot about them. But a fool thinks only about having a good time. It's not that they think about it mostly, it's the only thing. They're one-sided. And so the teacher wants us to be balanced, and he says, look, we got to bring thinking about those things and facing the difficult circumstances into be wise. And so he ends his advice to us on this note. He says, enjoy prosperity while you can. But when hard times strike, realize that both came from God. Remember that nothing is certain in this life. Enjoy prosperity while you can, but when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. And remember that nothing is certain in this life. Now that may sound like a threat. Nothing's certain in life. And you could say, well, then should we feel uneasy because we don't know what's going to happen next? Or is there a way that that can be therapeutic, can be like a Larry Norman album that tells us nothing is certain in life? And that's okay. Nothing is a lock and everything isn't sewn up, but it's okay. That life can throw all kinds of curves at us and all kinds of things can go wrong along the way and things can happen that are outside of our control. And as believers, we can say, that is okay. Why? Because God is in control. He says, when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. That God is there with us in the good times and God is there with us in the struggle. And so we can face them. And we can learn and grow from them. We can be stretched by them. And we can develop character and wisdom. Or we can be foolish and do everything in our power to avoid anything that's hard. It won't work. But we could try. But for every ounce of energy that we spend trying to avoid pain and trying to seek pleasure, we can end up chasing after the wrong goal instead of saying, God, whatever the circumstance is, what do you want me to learn? What are you trying to do inside of me? How can I come through this circumstance and learn what I need to learn and grow in the ways I need to grow? Not so that my life is easier, but so that I am the person you want me to be. He says, enjoy prosperity. If it comes, if you got it, then enjoy it. But when hard times strike, realize both come from God and remember that nothing is certain in this life. Enjoy the good. Face the struggle. Acknowledge that it's real. And know that God is there in all of it. And that he can be trusted. And that even when we don't see how, we can know that he is good. And that he is powerful. And that truth can anchor what we're going through.